Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Ulrich, and I am here with my peer, Cisa Kurian, and welcome to our presentation on our journey towards passwordless authentication. Cisa and I are both part of the Global Security Organization at CVS Health, and we are on a path to help make our consumer authentication experience not only secure, but easier to use. So Cisa will begin the presentation talking about the details of what we have done so far, what our current path forward is, and then I will go through demos of what that looks like for our consumers. So Cisa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. I'm Cisa Kurian. Amy and I are part of the next-gen authentication team within Global Security. We are responsible for the security of externally facing customer applications across the enterprise. Our customers are primarily our members, but also include our providers, plan sponsors, agents, brokers. In fact, we have a significant number of constituent types in our external user base. Being part of the security team, our focus is to ensure integrity and confidentiality of customer data. User experience also needs to be positive to drive traffic to our digital assets. Unlike the process for the workforce user, for whom we can lay down the law and expect adherence, for the external user, they would just simply walk away if the user login experience is cumbersome in any way. Good security is always a balance between security and usability. We believe authentication requirements should consider the level of risk perceived in the transaction and the level of assurance required for the action the user is trying to complete. Our goal is to increase friction for a potential threat actor while enabling ease of use for a legitimate user. In order to accomplish this, we are building out an authentication platform to provide risk-based and passwordless authentication capabilities in our web, mobile, IoT, and voice applications. This is a high-level overview of how the NGA program has evolved over the past few years. We started off by introducing two-factor authentication for a high-risk transaction, and this was backed by a risk engine. For our mobile applications, we enabled biometric authentication, and this was based on FIDO standards. We introduced and formalized the voice program, which enabled risk-based authentication in our voice channel. We used WebAuthn to allow for passwordless authentication on the web. And for users who had devices that did not support biometric authentication, we enabled push-to-mobile authentication. For next year, one of our critical objectives that we are trying to meet is to build out a common portal, one-stop shop, where users can come for all their consumer identity management needs. The password problem, we are all familiar with it. Like everyone else, we started our journey with complete reliance on passwords for authentication. We had multiple identity stores across the enterprise to manage user credentials for various applications. But passwords are easy to crack. People do reuse passwords across different websites, and bots enable threat actors to scale their credential stuffing operations. Stolen credentials from one website most likely will work against several others, actually. These are just a few reasons why we cannot hinge our authentication decision on passwords alone. All of us know that. We are all here probably because we know this problem only too well. So we were forced to introduce multi-factor authentication to mitigate these risks from stolen credentials. MFA was the norm for workforce since early 2000s, but it was still too much friction for authenticating external users. First off, we reduced the attack surface by introducing an identity provider to manage the authentication flow for all applications. OAuth was implemented to control access to APIs, And we also added a risk context to the authentication process. With every engagement with the consumer, we have a wealth of information that we collect about the user's login pattern that is otherwise simply lost and probably archived into log files. So we started cleaning this information up, like the IPs that the user is accessing our websites from, geolocation if the user allows it, tons of attributes that's available about the browser that's being used, the device that's being used. We got all this information and create a baseline profile for the user. Every time the user logs in, an evaluation of the user's profile helps us figure out anomalies in access pattern that could trigger out the requirement for MFA or multi-factor authentication. For example, if a user has retrieved his username and attempts to reset password, we could check if the user has recently authenticated successfully. And if the user has authenticated successfully, say in the past couple of days or even a week, it is unlikely that it is the real user who has forgotten both username and password and is trying to reset it. I can see the user forgetting one, but not both, right? So this transaction should definitely be flagged as high risk and would require a multi-factor authentication. On the other hand, if the last authenticated date was over 6 months ago, and we have seen the user from the same device, same IP, same geolocation, we can actually allow the user without even prompting them for MFA, although the user is trying to complete a high-risk transaction, because we've seen this user before from the same device, and we have a high level of assurance that the user is who the user is claiming to be. Obviously, we'll validate and collect and validate like minimal information. But again, the user experience can be more friendly. So earlier, these were all unrelated, discrete events. Now we are tying them together, and this has enabled us to adopt a holistic approach towards authentication. Intelligence from various tools in the enterprise, fraud prevention tools, data analytics platform, it's all fed into the risk engine. And this risk-based approach enabled us to enforce multi-factor authentication only for high-risk transactions. So we're constantly working on fine-tuning our risk engine policies to improve the user experience and also to prevent access when we perceive risk of any kind with the transaction. Again, that constant theme that we have is to make the user experience the easiest for the real user, whereas increase friction whenever we perceive risk. For mobile applications, we enable passwordless authentication, biometric authentication using FIDO standards. Aetna was part of the FIDO Alliance since its inception. And after the acquisition, CVS Health has continued its membership in the Alliance. Why did we choose FIDO? FIDO standards are open and allows for simpler and stronger authentication and is based on public key cryptography. In other words, it's easy to use and more secure at the same time. Let me provide a quick summary of how FIDO works, and I'll start with the registration process. When a user visits a website for the first time from a device, they are prompted to enroll. The device sends the user information on the user trying to enroll to the online service provider, which is backed by a FIDO server. The FIDO server returns a list of authenticators that matches the acceptance policy for that application and also sends along a challenge. The user is prompted to pick an authenticator from that list, and local authentication allows the generation of a private public key pair unique to the local device, the online service the user is trying to access. And the private key is stored on the device and is used to sign the challenge and return to the server with the corresponding public key. The FIDO server verifies the signature and associates it with the user's account and persists all of it with the public key. The private key and any information about the local authentication methods, such as biometric measurements or templates, never leave the local device. So during the subsequent login process, when the user comes back to login after enrollment, the online service, which is again backed by the FIDO server, challenges the user to log in and sends a challenge. So since the user is on a previously registered device, the user unlocks the authenticator using the same method that the user registered with. And this prompts the selection of the correct key based on the domain name the user is trying to access. And the device uses the private key to sign the challenge that was sent by the server. The signed challenge is sent back to the server, and the server verifies it with the public key that was stored for that user account and logs in the user. So what we have is phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. You really literally cannot give away your secrets. Keys and biometrics never leave the device. There are no server-side secrets. I could harvest all the public keys on the FIDO server and still not be better off because of it. And most importantly, we get two-factor authentication with a single gesture. Like with a simple swipe, you're presenting the something you are factor. And since you're completing the action on a previously registered device, you're also proving the something you have factor. So again, it's easy to use and it's more secure at the same time. For our web users, we implemented biometric authentication capabilities using WebAuthn standards. WebAuthn is a W3 standard and is a subspec of FIDO2. It was built or developed under the FIDO umbrella. WebAuthn describes an interface or specification for a browser JavaScript API. It outlines the interaction between the browser and the trusted platform module on the device to enable FIDO-based authentication. Interaction with the service provider and FIDO backend is the same as what I described earlier during the FIDO flow for registration and login. I want to touch on some of the challenges we faced while enabling passwordless authentication using WebAuthn. Today, WebAuthn does not offer an API for local check to see if the device has any credential enrolled for a user, RPID, or domain. When we raised this as a concern, we were told that it's a privacy issue to allow the check before the user is actually authenticated. And that's fair, but it is not uncommon for our users to want to register multiple devices for biometric authentication. So when the user is challenged to authenticate, the errors, unfortunately, do not distinguish the failures resulting from credentials not being on the device and the failures resulting from incorrect biometrics or PIN. So for the time being, we decided we will challenge the users a couple of times. It is hard to fail biometric authentication and take the user through the registration process flow if the user does fail that authentication step, assuming that the user is trying to register a new device. FIDO2 also offers another specification called CTAP to bind external authenticators like hardware tokens. Our current direction is to not support CTAP. This was just to limit calls to the call center with enrollment issues. We decided we'll allow applications to adopt WebAuthn, and based on adoption and the ease of adoption and such, we'll enable CTAP probably in next year or so. So the latest brands of desktop devices are shipped with biometric authentication capabilities. For those users without such devices, we decided to enable push to mobile to approve authentication for the web flow from their mobile device. Our risk engine, which is constantly at play for all authentication processes, provides the resistance to phishing attacks. During the enrollment process, the user, if the user is coming from a device we've never seen before, the user is sent through multi-factor authentication and the user risk profile is created. During subsequent logins, we check with the risk engine, and the policies are not as strict as they would be for a high-risk use case. And if we've seen the user from the same IP or the same location or the device, or if anything matches, we'll allow authenticated mobile approval for the web login to proceed. So our ultimate destination in our journey is complete elimination of passwords. Along with passwords, we want to eliminate the use of KBA as well. KBA, or knowledge-based authentication, unfortunately relies on information which the user sometimes finds it hard to remember and a hacker can easily obtain. Today, we still use KBA and passwords, obviously, in our enrollment, device binding, and account recovery flows. This year, we introduced MNO check for ID proofing, where we compare the information provided by users with demographic information that's returned by network carriers, and with a quick one-time password to the phone in order to confirm possession of the device, we have a more secure way to verify identity. Next year, we want to add document verification to our toolbox of ID proofing options. We are part of the DID Alliance that is building an interoperable platform that allows users to be in charge of their identity and privacy. Similarly, we want to enable use of a verified identity from any channel, whether it's web, mobile, or voice, or even in person at our pharmacies, to establish relationship in another channel. So for next year, we want to build out a common interface that will be a one-stop shop for all consumer identity management needs, whether it's registration, enabling access on a new device, or account recovery. We at CVS Health are doing our bit to pave the way for a truly passwordless future. With that, I'll let Amy walk us through some of our user flows. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Cisa. So now I get to show you a little bit of what Cisa spoke about. We did a proof of concept earlier this year to prove out FIDO2 and WebAuthn, and we put together these screen mockups to help demonstrate to our business the capabilities of passwordless authentication. So I will caveat that these flows I'm about to go through, I haven't gone through the UX design yet. We're doing the backend development right now. So this is more of a tool to showcase and sell passwordless authentication, which honestly pretty much sells itself once our business users saw it. So with that, let me share. Okay, so the use case that I'm going to go through is around the passwordless authentication. So a user would come to the CVS website. They would enter in their username, email address. Obviously, the first time they come in, they'd have to enter in their password. And at that point, this is where we prompt them. Do you want to save time next time and sign in without a password? Hopefully all users jump at the opportunity and say yes, that they don't want to use their password next time. So they would continue to set up. We would make sure they go through the multi-factor authentication to get their PIN before we allow them to enroll into passwordless. At that point, they would receive their one-time PIN, enter it into the site, and then they would be presented with their passwordless login options. So as Cisa mentioned, we're providing two passwordless login options for our users, the FIDO2 WebAuthn, as well as the push to mobile, which is backed by our risk engine. In this case, we're just doing the platform authenticators first. So this first flow will show how a user that has a device that has either Windows Hello, Windows 10 and above that you can enter in your PIN, or a Mac using your biometrics could be used in order to do that. We wanted to provide multiple options for our users because we know not everybody of our 100 million plus consumers are going to have a device that is capable with FIDO2. So if a user would come in using their Windows computer, it would simply prompt them once they choose to enroll. It would prompt them with the same PIN that they used to set up their computer, and they would enter it in. And at that point, they are automatically enrolled and logged in straight to the website without a password. So that was the Windows flow. So going through what would it look like from a Mac experience, Again, user would come in, they would enroll. It would prompt them for their Touch ID, just showing the picture of the keyboard here for what they would do. They would enter in their Touch ID. They would hit allow to allow use of their security key. And again, straight into the website. Very easy experience for our users using WebAuthn. So push to mobile, same thing, same screen. They would have the ability, backed by our risk engine, to choose to enroll and to push to mobile if they didn't have that capability built into their computer. So I'm going to go through the flow that shows that they haven't downloaded our application yet. So this would walk them through. Here's how you download the mobile application. Once they do that, they would come back to click this link and they're going to pair their mobile device to the web application. They would open up their mobile app at that point to scan the QR code. So from their mobile device, scan the QR code to pair with the website. It would go through a pairing process. We would back that with the FIDO authenticator. So they would select, Face ID, Touch ID. They would enter that in. And at that point, they are successfully enrolled into the push to mobile authentication. So another passwordless experience for our users. So what does that look like the next time they come in? So next time they come back, if we go through the first use case, if they had previously enrolled in a FIDO2 authenticator and a platform authenticator, they would come back, enter in their username or their email address, hit continue. At this point, we recognize that they have previously registered with that platform authenticator from that device. They would go ahead and automatically just touch their Touch ID or their PIN if they're using Windows. We'd allow access to that security key. And again, straight in the next time that they come back to the website. Push to mobile, same flow. User would come back, enter in their email address, hit continue. We recognize that that user has set up push to mobile, prompt them to grab their phone. At that point, they receive a pop-up notification from their mobile device for that app, telling them someone's trying to authenticate from that cvs.com website. Should we allow it? At that point, they would click allow, prompt it with that FIDO authenticator. And again, they're straight into the website. So as you can see from a user experience, it's very simple, very easy to use. And our business is looking forward to rolling this out.
Thank you for listening. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have about our implementation of FIDO at CVS.